Hello everyone, my name is Scott, and I've enjoyed meeting actually a couple of you over these last few days, but for those of you who I have not met, I just thought I'd introduce myself shortly. I'm a traveling journalist who is early into a 2.5-year project during which I'll live for 1 month each in 28 different American cities. So I was recently in Miami, I'm in Houston for November, I'm in New Orleans for December, and I'm going to be moving clockwise around the country for this period. I'm doing this to write a book about market urbanism. Market urbanism is the idea of applying market-oriented solutions to urban issues specifically. So I call for deregulation of land use and transportation, better business climates, streamlined bureaucracies, and better city finances. In each city I visit, I'll describe a different market urbanism reform and hope to complete the book by 2017. And I'm also a roving correspondent for Forbes magazine. So I travel a lot, and when visiting cities, I enjoy walking their streets and trying to decipher whether or not they are working at street level. And after several days in Austin, I've seen a lot of visual cues that imply this. You've got construction cranes, you've got new roads, you've got an energetic young population. So this feels like a boomtown here. At the same time, I've visited other cities and instantly determined that something is off. You walk into downtown Detroit, what do you see? Graffiti, vacant buildings, street people staring into their liquor bottles, basically. And so visually, Austin and Detroit are a study in contrasts. But other times, a city's looks don't necessarily explain how it's working. For example, many people would visit New York City, see urban density, and conclude that it is ipso facto successful. However, there's more than meets the eye. New York City has congestion, it has failing schools, it has unaffordable housing, it has stifling regulations for businesses. So New York's appearance is an anecdote. It doesn't explain whether or not that city works, especially for the middle class. So the question I'm presenting today is this: when discussing cities, how can we surpass the street level anecdotes and explore data that truly quantifies how they are doing? And which statistical indicators describe why Austin works better than Detroit? Is it growth rates? Is it median housing prices? Is it public service quality? Is it debt levels? So in a world in which cities are constantly analyzed, which statistics matter and which ones don't? So my speech is a thought experiment. I'm covering 30 different economic and quality of life indicators to explore why each is or is not important. And so the name of this speech is, actually go back a bit, how to quantify a successful city, 30 indices. And there's two reasons that I think this conversation is necessary. So the first one is that there is an ideological debate right now between the pro-density set and the pro-suburban set. So if you call one group the Richard Floridas, they're going to advocate for the New Yorks and the San Franciscos. And the other group, we'll call them the Joel Kotkins, who advocate for like the Houstons and the Oklahoma Cities and the Nashvilles. And there are statistical categories that each group uses to justify why their model is best. Tori just went over many of the ones for Houston. And sometimes when mentioning these statistics, the caveats that go into these statistics are not mentioned. For example, a New Yorker will brag that median incomes there are higher, but he won't mention that cost of living is higher. So those two things essentially cancel themselves out. The spending power is not necessarily higher in New York City. So I think an analysis like this is important in fleshing out how to look at these statistics and which ones even matter. And the second reason is that there's ambiguity about this subject, and oftentimes commentators who try explaining whether a city is working will either use no data or they'll use irrelevant indicators. So, for example, I've read, and probably some of you have read, stories about the comeback of Pittsburgh. And these journalists often point to the construction of a few new heavily subsidized downtown towers as proof that it's coming back. But you know what? Pittsburgh's population has declined in every decade since 1950, including the 2000s during the so-called urban renaissance that hit a lot of other cities. So my question is, does that not matter in the conversation if you're going to write an article about it? What about the fact that Pittsburgh has high debt, poor air quality, an aging population with little turnover? None of those matter? So commentators are not using the indicators they need to arrive to the correct conclusions. And so they say things like Pittsburgh is coming back when it's not. In other cases, they use dubious models. So the two studies I encountered while researching for this speech both of them aim to calculate the best performing cities. And both use some sensible economic criteria, but oftentimes would add irrelevant criteria. So one study was done by the Urban Land Institute, which is a smart growth think tank in Washington, D.C. And they had one category for image and attractiveness, quantifying things like cities' aesthetic characteristics and their branding efforts. Unsurprisingly, ones like Tokyo and New York performed very well in this study, but I didn't really learn anything about what it's like to live in those cities from the study. The University of Navarra in Spain had a more respectable study, but it too had some curious indices. It wanted to quantify things like the quality of the government websites of different cities, their number of Facebook users by population, their ability to lure international tourists. This study had an entire section dedicated to urban planning with the stupid indices that you'd think might result, such as number of bike shops per 100,000 residents and the number of architectural firms in each city. So these studies provided some mixed up indicators, and a legitimate study, in my opinion, would ignore aesthetics and branding and how many bike lanes a city has, and they would get to the meat and potatoes of how a city functions. So I'm about to present 30 indicators that factor in multiple aspects of city life, and I hope they provide a holistic view at the factors that need to be weighed when quantifying these cities. So we'll start with economic indicators, and number one, population growth rate. To me, that's the number one indicator of any, of not just a city, of a territory in general. This fall, I lived in Miami, and I met exiles firsthand who had risked their lives at some point in their life to float on self-made rafts to escape Cuba. And I thought to myself, you know, you have to be a really bad place, in a really unsuccessful place, if people are going to risk their lives to float across the Florida Straits to get away from you. And yet, at the same time, if a city or country is growing, it means numerous factors are working for them. They're likely providing good jobs, good schools, good roads, affordable housing. It's like it's the starting point for judging how a city is doing. And you'll note at the bottom of these slides that I list which city is performing best on each indicator. So number two, unemployment rate. Perhaps the most important thing after moving to a city is finding a job. But the unemployment rate comes with a caveat, which is why I'm giving this speech, because there are wrong-headed assumptions about a lot of these statistics. So President Obama has constantly claimed that the unemployment rate has dipped during his presidency, but more astute observers know that a lot of the reason for that is that people who are looking for work and can't find it drop out of the workforce. So the workforce participation has dipped under Obama as well, down to about 63%, which is the lowest since Jimmy Carter. I think the same conversation applies when you're discussing cities. Maybe workforce participation is more important than unemployment rate. Number three, job growth. This indicator takes a more holistic view of a metro economy. For example, NewGeography.com's job growth study, which is a blog published by Joel Kotkin, used statistics dating to 2003 to quantify job growth. So contrast this with the unemployment rate, which is seasonal. Number four, wage growth is also important because it determines what kind of jobs are being created. Are they low-paying service jobs, or are they more skilled jobs? Number five, innovation rates as defined by the number of patents that are given in a metro area, and that can determine the entrepreneurial spirit of a given metro. Number 6, startup activity, as can an area's rate of new businesses also imply its entrepreneurial spirit. Number 7 is worker productivity, which is usually defined as gross metro product divided by number of people living there. Number 8, exports per employee is interesting one. Yeah, I don't know. I had not heard of this until this week. I was speaking with Tom Bacon of Lionstone Investments, which is a Houston company that finances developments nationwide. And he was showing me a U.S. map, and on it were about 20 green dots representing cities that his research team, using a lot of the same indicators that I've already mentioned, had determined were investment-worthy metros. And a lot of these green dots were all your stereotypical boom towns. You had New York, San Francisco, Houston, Austin, so on. But I noticed Miami wasn't a green dot. And having come from there, I said, that's kind of odd to me because that place is literally considered the U.S. destination for every rich Latin American out there. And somehow that's not a top investment? And he said, Miami's problem is that it's built on housing and tourism, and the high-wage, high-productivity cities are built on manufacturing and innovation. When I asked Tom what's the best indicator he used to determine the city's manufacturing strength, he said exports per employee. So I couldn't find the data on which cities performed best for this. And I got the sense from this guy, Tom, that he didn't really want to tell me because he described this indicator as his secret sauce for determining where to invest. But I thought it was an interesting indicator anyway. So
is that exports out of that municipal area or exports?
Metro, he said
metro area, so exporting from Houston to Austin or Houston to Mexico?
Worldwide.
So
all exports.
Or
yeah.
International exports, not national exports. Okay.
I think just exports in general. Like
it has to be international.
International.
It's international.
Exports
International.
international. You can't.
Yeah.
From an economic development point, it doesn't have to be, you just have to get it out of town.
Yeah.
It's out of town.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
we're selling it
somewhere.
better.
But what he said is that cities need to be selling something that the world wants. That's how he termed it. So
So he was probably talking about international, but
Who?
for your purposes, does it need to be international?
to me, if you're a metro economy exporting something, whether it's international to another city, you're selling a product.
Right.
So
Yeah.
Well, a lot of
I don't-
seaports move a lot of cargo that was stuff made somewhere else. It's funneled through the seaport and then
Okay.
goes.
Number nine. Okay, inequality. Now I put this up there, and you see the question mark. I don't think inequality levels are relevant in a city. I merely put this up to explain why I don't think they're relevant. If a city is unequal, the only thing that means is that it happens to attract both rich and poor people. I don't think it implies anything about their underlying economic health. Inequality levels are a demographic characteristic. Take Miami, for example. It has high inequality through the sheer fact that it attracts people from all over the world. It attracts Brazilian bankers. It attracts people escaping by raft from Cuba and Haiti. So it's going to be unequal. I don't think there's any magic wand that Miami can wave to narrow this gap, because the fact is the world is unequal, and if you're a global city, that's just what you're going to be. So to me, the Gini coefficient is irrelevant, even though it was used in a lot of these other city indicator reports that I read. But two indicators are better than inequality at determining the city's economic health. Median household income gives a better overall picture rather than obsessing about the extreme ends of the wage scale. And upward mobility rates, because it's not so much whether a city has poor people, because many cities have historically drawn poor people, but whether it can provide them opportunity. Harvard University did a study called the Equality of Opportunity Project, which judged how well low-income children growing up in a city are doing by age 26 in that city. There might be better studies out there, but I thought that was one of the ones that was interesting. So moving on to category 2, and the remaining indicators deal more with quality of life. So the Bay Area, Silicon Valley actually cleaned up the field for a lot of those economic indicators, but the latter ones I think favor America's smaller and more spread out cities. So let's go with those. Number 1, violent crime rates. Okay, Michael Barone once called crime the most negative tax on property. I couldn't agree more and think this is a really important indicator, along with number 2, school quality. You're looking right there. Maybe these are the 2 most important when you're talking about middle class retention. Number 3, road quality, defined by which roads are in the best condition. The only links I found for cities were the ones that had the worst roads, and San Francisco won that honor. So, no, actually, keep that on for a second. So I put 3A, public transit quality. And I wanted to, I just wanted to throw that out there. I don't think that public transit quality has the importance of road quality, because in most metro areas, there are not as many public transit users as road users. So it's just not equitable, like it's not an apples to apples, the importance of the indicator.
Well, we keep on getting, I'm jumping ahead here, what maybe, but
Yeah.
we keep on getting beat up in Tampa Bay area because we can't attract the big business or the, innovation destination because everybody wants transit. And we're, maybe,
We'll hold that thought for the end of the
I got
discussion.
a couple more indicators. So,
yeah.
public utility. Okay, so number 4, public utility costs. That's a strong indicator because in cities that don't work, a lot of these authorities are mismanaged. Just think the New York, New Jersey Port Authority. Category 3, public administration indicators, looking at the quality of a city's management and the subsequent cost for residents. I think the main one is number 1, economic freedom rates. I think another speaker has already gone over that, but basically that just deals with government size, property takings, labor freedom. I've expanded a little bit beyond just the economic freedom designation. So number 2 is overall tax burden. Obviously that's a cost of living expense for residents and businesses. Number 3, regulatory climate, meaning the time and cost required for opening a business. Property rights, number 4, meaning the rate that cities use eminent domain. Number 5, credit rating, tells a lot about a city, about municipal finances in a city. Number 6, debt per household, kind of the same thing. And then number 7, corruption levels can indicate the quality of a city's civil service. The most corrupt city, according to the University of Illinois at Chicago, wonder why they would want to give that state. We all know. And the thing about these public administration indicators is that you won't see them in other city performance studies, but administration suggests how a city is working internally. And it's ironic to me that the glam cities that get all the publicity happen to be the ones that are most mismanaged internally, and so you don't see how the sausage is being made. But we're talking, Philly, New York, DC, they would rank horrible in a lot of these indicators. So category 4 is quality of life indicators, and number 1 is an important one. Average commute times, something everybody deals with every day, and they are longer in dense legacy cities. Number 2, affordability, which Forbes measured by comparing metro areas' prices for homes, food, and gasoline with their median income levels to determine spending power. So this, I think, might be more important than median household income in giving the whole picture of how affordable a city is. Number 3, car collision rates, higher in the Northeast where it's more congested. And I think that's a legitimate public safety issue. And then number 4, I'm just kind of throwing them out there, but I think air quality could be used. I think number 5, that pollution levels are important. Number 6, access to healthcare, because healthcare costs vary by city based on the regulations that exist, oftentimes at city and state level. And number 7, I'll grant this probably isn't maybe all that important, but it's something people would think about, such as per capita availability of restaurants and entertainment. And number 8, friendliness. As someone who's traveled a lot, I've witnessed the different personalities of different cities. I'm sure we all know which cities probably rank better on this. The southern ones, and the northeastern and coastal cities don't rank very high, according to surveys by Condé Nast. So, in conclusion, I've covered 30 indices. I think a lot of them are going to be self-evident to this audience, but they're not used in public conversations by journalists and oftentimes not even by academics who should know better. And they don't explain everything that someone may like about a city, but if I crafted an equation that used all these indices, I think it would be a pretty accurate look at which cities are working. And I think the highest scoring cities would be many of the ones that ADC celebrates. And I think a lot of the hyper-dense ones perform well in the economic indicators, but they don't perform particularly well on any of the other 19 indicators. And if I had to hypothesize, I think the cities that would do the best would be the ones that are growing quickly and whose densities have ensured a certain level of economic complexity, and yet at the same time, they're still managing to maintain the qualities of mid-sized cities. So less traffic, like they have less traffic, they have better schools, they have clean air, their city hall isn't full of crooks, public services haven't completely gone to hell. In other words, their cities that are working would be the ones that are urbanizing, but they haven't gone overboard. So we're thinking Nashville, Indy, Oklahoma City, Minneapolis, and I'd say the big 4 in Texas would fit under this designation too. So I think these kind of cities, these mid-sized to quasi-mid-sized, quasi-global cities, offer a model of success for America, but debates aside, I hope that this flurry of indicators has at least brought some clarity into the issue.